So I would like to introduce today's speakers. Dr. Tiina Kontinen is a senior lecturer in development and international cooperation at the University of Jyväskylä in Finland.
Okay. Good morning, everybody.
As a part of her Academy of Finland Research Fellowship that she currently holds, Tiina leads a research group on civil society and citizenship in development. The group searches for new approaches to understand contextualized organizing and mobilizing processes, as well as conducts critical analysis of practices under the banner of strengthening citizenship and civil society. And currently the group focuses on Eastern Africa and Finland. Dr. Kees Biekart is Associate Professor at the International Institute of Social Studies in The Hague. So welcome, Kees. His area of expertise is in NGOs, social movements, civil society, and foreign aid, in particular in relation to Latin America. And he also works on participatory research methods and action research techniques. Currently, he is also co-leading the Civic Driven Change think tank. Then we are going to have a video of Marianne Milstein. She can't be present at the webinar, but she sent a very comprehensive video that we are going to watch very soon. She's a researcher at the Center for Welfare and Labor Research at the Oslo Metropolitan University. She's currently working on a project on governing the green shift in Oslo, Gothenburg and Copenhagen through leadership of co-creation. This project aims to create new and cutting-edge knowledge about the challenges and dilemmas public leaders face in governing the green shift. So we are going to start now with Marianne's presentation, and I would like to ask Tiina to show her screen so that we can watch the video.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Marianne Milstein, and I'm a researcher at the Norwegian Institute for Urban and Regional Research at the Oslo Metropolitan University. I've had the pleasure of being the co-convener together with Tiina and Kees of this new EADI Working Group. Unfortunately, I managed to double book this morning, so I have to be in another meeting. But through this presentation, I hope that I at least can provide and contribute some ideas and input for the discussions. Now, one of the thinkings we had about this webinar was that as conveners, we should say a little bit about our own experiences and perspective coming into this conversation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my political geographer's hat on and just try to tease out a few ways and few examples of what that perspective brings into this so-called rethinking of civil society research in development. Now, as a political geographer, I see civil society both in relational and in multiscalar terms. And it might be that none of these perspectives or notions are unfamiliar to any of you, but I'm going to tease them out anyways. Tiina and I wrote last year, we define civil society in this one term, its relation to relational space. That brings us to our other approach in the article, and my political geography hat as well, is that when we talk about multiscalar politics, we are concerned with how power works in and through the networks that work across spatial scales, and how these are shaping and reshaping practices. So for us, trying to understand we have to rethink an agenda on civil society, this multiscalar dynamics is one important piece of the puzzle. There are, of course, many ways and perspectives to discuss development topics. But the argument, as presented is that taking this relational and multiscalar approach helps us to expose what seems to be a global paradox. And this paradox is really nothing new. It's just that it seems that we have forgotten some of the conversations that has been going on or used to be going on in terms of the politics of development. And that global paradox is that we have a global agenda and a new emphasis on the sustainable development goals, where civil society is given a key role in achieving these objectives in partnerships with states and businesses across the world. But there is really no teasing out or understanding of what that means and the implications of that particular role. And as we all know, working in the development field, we ask all the difficult questions about what kinds of civil society actors, what kind of donor relations are involved, what kind of partnerships are we talking about, what are the power relations of these organizations, and what kind of agency and what kind of influence will they have in trying to achieve these social development objectives. So that is one side of the paradox. But the other side of that paradox is that while we continue to have this global agreement and unquestionable emphasis on civil society, the political space of civil society activism seem to change, and in some places are shrinking. And that is quite problematic if we at the same time assume that civil society is to play this key role in global development. But there's another dynamic and another kind of point to that as well, is that as this paradox plays itself out, and we see increasingly forms of contestations and protests on a national level in cities across many parts of the world, there might also be kind of a change of the characteristics and dynamics of civil society in development, whether that is changing the power relations or the classical network relations between international NGOs and local NGOs, whether we see the emergence of more locally embedded NGOs, we see the emergence of regional networks of NGO working on quite critical right-based issues. So there are other networks and probably other alliances at work that have to be brought into this conversation. And I think that this emphasis on the relational character of civil society, as well as this multiscalar politics, will help us to better understand these changing dynamics. This is not really a new argument in itself, and I just kind of, it came to mind this article that is now 10 years old almost, about the return of politics in development studies. And I thought that maybe it's time to remind ourselves about that point. There is another aspect of that definition of civil society, and in particular the emphasis on the multitude of identities, of actors, of issues that are making up the politics of civil society. And a lot of my work in Delft in Cape Town has really tried to provide this more nuanced understanding of these relational dynamics between different kinds of actors, different issues, how certain issues are being politicized at certain points, what kind of identities and what kind of agencies are emerging through very localized informal networks, but also how these grassroots struggles with very limited resources and capacities also try to link up with locally based NGOs. They see themselves as part of a global agenda sometimes in terms of the struggle against evictions, and they mediate and they negotiate all sorts of quite difficult relations with the local states, and moving in and out of these, as someone has called this, spaces of participation, sometimes working quite closely with government actors and at other times contesting them and protesting them quite fiercely. And I think that, again, this relational understanding through a more everyday perspective is also an important research agenda if we are to understand the role of civil society in development. Another layer of this relational dynamics is perhaps not so much directly on the idea of civil society, but the idea of citizenship. But of course, the whole debate about citizenship, in particularly in the development context, is of course civil society as a space of right-bearing citizens. And I'm not going to go into that discussion as such. You guys might do it as part of the discussions. But one of the things that struck me working in Delft for a period of 10 years is not just the fluidity of organizing and networking, but the fluidity and dynamics of the many identities that shape what kind of political agency that are expressed within this community. And that has a lot to do with the politics of housing and politics of the right to housing in Cape Town. But it really made me try to understand and try to unpack and make an argument for that we not only have to get a more nuanced understanding of the fluidity of community organizing, but also perhaps a more nuanced understanding of what we see as political agency and as expressions of citizenship in a local community. I'm trying to make two general points about what kind of research or the research agenda that I think could be interesting and important and part of this working group. And again, as I said in the beginning, taking my political geographer's hat on my contribution. I think there are, firstly, that we need to return to the politics of civil society and development research. And what I mean by that is that this is not a new agenda. And I remember when I started working on social movement and the politics of development around the year 2000, at least I sensed that there were much more focus during those first years of my own academic career on different kind of aspects of the politics of development. And this article of Sam Hickey that was published almost 10 years ago suddenly came to mind when I was preparing for this, where he discussed this return of politics in development studies. And I wonder whether that is an agenda that has disappeared again since 2009. I might be wrong, but I think it's a valid argument. But the other one that Tiina and I also make in our paper is the importance of unpacking this contextual and lived experience of civil society activism, but also the agency and the different political identities and the shifting identities that underlies all sorts of civil society activism and community organizing, and that we do this both in and across different places, spaces, and scales. And again, I'm really, really sorry that I can't be part of the discussions, but I hope at least that I have given some food for thought for the conversation. Thank you.
Okay, so that was very well to hear.
I hear, yeah.
Okay, Tiina, it's your turn.
All right, thank you. Okay, thank you. So continuing from where Marianne stopped, I introduced my hat. My hat is from the organizational perspective and perspective from organizational studies, and I just would like to say where we are in the research at the moment, and what might be the interesting new ideas coming up from the organizational studies. So my research so far, I did my PhD over 10 years ago, which was again on NGOs. So when we speak about organizational perspective to civil society in development research, we all know that there has been a lot of research on NGOs as organization, kind of this very kind of narrow perspective of what is civil society, what is civil society support. It has been from the 1990s. There has been a lot of research on NGOs, and I have been participating in this production of research on NGOs. And here on the right, you can see a book that is actually coming out next week, which kind of tries to put together all these 20 years of research on different kind of issues on NGOs and everyday practice, as NGOs as everyday practices. So I have been looking at learning in its very different meanings, knowledge production, including monitoring and evaluation, North-South partnerships, and thematic, geographically, I have been researching Finnish NGOs, naturally, then Tanzanian and Ugandan ones at the moment. And mostly my research approach has been that I have been working together with NGOs. So we have produced kind of generated the data together. We have analyzed the data, some of the data together, and discussed about the tentative analysis and so on and so forth. So it has been some kind of action, not exactly action research, but kind of methodologically working very, very, very closely with the different NGOs. And I have also tried to kind of have this agenda of when we are doing development research, we should do it with the southern universities and southern research institutions, and trying to build this kind of networks and research partnerships as well. So if we look at what could be the organizational perspectives, of course there are plenty of these organizational perspectives, but there's a lot of literature, a lot of discussion from some kind of kind of management perspectives to organizations. So how to develop organizations, how to best govern organizations, what should be the government, the structures of organization, how we should measure, how we should plan. We all know this. When we look at what is happening in the practice in NGOs and civil society organizations, there's a lot of this kind of organizational development going on, organizational capacity building, learning to be an organization principally. And this also relates to the discussion about monitoring and evaluation and impact assessment in order to learn what you do, what works, what doesn't work, and so on and so forth. So very trying to manage better the organizations. Then if we look at the other the kind of opposite discussion which comes from the critical management scholarship and the critical management literature, it is kind of critical of this so-called mainstream management approaches, and it tries to critically analyze, okay, what is happening. There is this the global managerialism coming in, and we should be critical towards that. We could analyze the kind of hegemonizing processes, especially when we speak about the North-South partnership between civil society organizations, NGOs, or even movements, that how certain, we could go northern or western ideals of liberal citizenship, of certain kind of issues, is kind of how it's becoming hegemonic thinking in the global civil society sphere. And this applies, of course, to the organizational forms and organizational models, that what kind of organizations, some kind of modern organizations are the right kinds of organizations. And of course, post-colonial theory gives many tools, theoretical tools, in order to theorize what is happening in the global scale. Then if we look at the organizational theory, it is not, I mean, it is again very wide area of research, but it's not management, and it's not always critical of management, but it kind of uses a lot of sociological theory, political theory to kind of understand what is happening in organizations in general. And when we look at the NGOs or civil society organizations from the organization theory point of view, we can, for example, study processes of adaptation of different kind of models, processes of translation, so the kind of global models, how they are translated in local contexts, in kind of matching the local forms of organizing. We can look at, for example, not only knowledge management or production of knowledge, but also the processes by which organizations produce ignorance, or they use strategic ignorance in order to continue their issues. So there are a lot of possibilities to understand or to research civil society organizing from the point of view of organization theory, but of course we have to always be also aware of what can we, I mean, the limitations. To start with, to asking about what is organization and what kind of different processes of organizing we can identify. And there's always also a question when we look at empirical realities, like in Uganda, for example, what kind of organization is legitimate, and what kind of organization can there be in certain kind of political environments and societal environments. Then the question of, as Marianne already mentioned, that okay, what is the agency? What kind of agency is gained through processes of organizing, and what kind of agency it creates in different empirical contexts. And then, of course, when we speak of organizing, coming together, there's always the question is who organize and who are involved in organizing, who are excluded on organization or from the organizing processes, and so on and so forth. So basically, from organizational point of view, you can be very prescriptive in the research. Okay, this is how you should. This is how organizations should work. They should have this kind of management procedures, and they should be kind of learning organizations. We all know this notion of learning organization. But then you can also be very critical about what is about the organizing itself and the kind of organizational processes. Or then you can be more descriptive to kind of have an idea that, okay, I want to analyze what kind of processes, what is happening in the everyday life of organizations and processes of organizing. And that is actually something that now has brought me to my new research agenda. Okay, so the kind of emerging themes that I'm actually working on right now, it's not so much about NGOs anymore, but it's more about how people organize in their daily lives and how they learn certain kind of competencies or certain kind of practices that we could kind of define under citizenship or citizenship agency for citizenship. So currently I'm leading 2 research projects together with Ugandan and Tanzanian universities, where we look with very everyday citizenship and the kind of grassroots perspective of what do people understand by citizenship, and what is meaningful participation for them, and what are the meaningful spaces of participation where they learn to organize and what kind of agency then kind of emerges out of these spaces. And if we look, for example, our preliminary data, what are the kind of meaningful avenues for participation? It's much about, you know, self-help groups, religious communities, economic production groups, and so on and so forth, where people, under which people are organized, and they are mobilized, and they are motivated to be organized in this sense. And by participating in these spaces, they also learn different kind of kind of citizens' competencies that might then emerge, might then kind of expand to other avenues, more political avenues as well. But this is something that is now ongoing, and you can see the photo of the research group. And actually, we just finished our 3 days workshop here in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, so I'm still here. But this is kind of the kind of landscape where I come to this discussion about civil society, citizenship and development. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tiina. So now we know where you are. I will take over. My name is Kees Biekart. I am in The Hague at the moment at the Institute of Social Studies. So Tiina and Marianne and I come from very different disciplinary backgrounds. So Tiina was just explaining her background in organization studies. Marianne very much from geography. I come from political science, political sociology, and my area of work has been mostly in Latin America, but recently also more on Africa. So, which is a nice, let's say, complementarity that we have in this newly established working group in EADI on civil society and citizenship and development. So we are trying to sort of make people enthusiastic also to see if they would like to participate in this working group. And we would like to hear also from you a little bit ideas where you think we should work. Let me briefly, I'm just going to be very brief. I have no PowerPoints because at the end of the academic season, I'm totally sort of PowerPoint blind. I can't handle them anymore, so you have to do it with me. Let me briefly say, sort of highlight 3 areas that I think is coming out of our discussion. The first is very much, let's say, the background, the reason that we started this is that the whole discussion of civil society was for sometimes dominated a lot by the simple role of NGOs, which was then sort of expanded to be all of civil society. But there was lots of sort of focus on NGOs as actors in development. And we know there has been lots of criticism about NGOs for which I will not get into detail, but there has been questioning of the role of NGOs, especially in relation to linking to their constituencies. So that is a topic of legitimacy that Tiina was talking about, which I think is still very important to study. So that is sort of this first area of actors where there's still important work to do also in coalitions. The second is more about context. We all have been talking about that. It is mentioned as this shrinking civic space. Well, to begin with, it is the civic space that we see in many countries that is attacked by governments, that is attacked by other groups in civil society. So civic space is under pressure, whereas we also would like, I very much like Tiina's notion of everyday citizenship. So this whole point that actually what you are trying to create in the context of civil society is vibrancy, is the possibility to engage. Meaningful participation was mentioned. I think that is a very important area. I would call it also active forms of citizenship. Even though we see that there are lots of limitations for participation and for the exercise of basic rights. There is a new area of research going on about what this civic space actually means, what it has in potential. And I think that is one of the things that this group is also hopefully going to focus on. Then the third point I would like to mention, so you have the actors and the context. And the third area is very much related to the change processes. So I've been working a lot on what we call civic-driven change. Rather than looking at the actors themselves, we've been looking at the process of change that these actors try to realize. And where I, together with Alan Fowler, we have worked on this concept of civic energy. Civic energy basically is this potential energy that you have everywhere in society, where people are trying to work together for change that is not only limited to individual interests, but of the interest of the common group, the public interest. So this is very much a process where we do not only look at civil society, because what you see is that actors try to make coalitions between several sectors of society. So you have groups in government, you have groups in market, and this whole division, this sectoral division, is not what it is about. It is actually about citizenship, and citizenship means that you can be in the 24 hours of a day move from being a citizen to also being a voter, to being a consumer, a producer, a father or a mother. So you have different functions, and these multiple sort of identities within citizenship are very important to explore. So this is sort of an area that we also like to look at in. Hello. Yeah. An area that we like to look at in the group. So the question that we have to the group of the participants of this webinar is to hear what your ideas are about what we are presenting, but also the ideas that you have about how can we revive this discussion on a critical view on civil society and citizenship within EADI, and what do you think are the important areas and themes you think we should focus on? I think that is the essential question that we'd like to discuss in the next half an hour or 25 minutes that the webinar is lasting. Thank you. Okay, so now I would like to ask the facilitator to take over. Julia.
Okay, so either you can ask your question in the chat, or you unmute your mic, and so I invite everybody to add to the discussion, and please give us your ideas or comments to the presentations made. So are there any volunteers to start? And is it clear how to do that? So if there's no immediate question, I would like to ask one. And I would like to know, the SDGs are also formulating a paragraph on citizenship, so with relation to the education section in the Sustainable Development Goals. I think it's the goal for point 7, and they refer to global citizenship. And is this something you have also integrated in your research agendas, or can you comment on that as well?
Well, I don't know about Tiina, but I can speak for myself. Actually, the only SDG that we have been looking at is 17, and in 17 stipulated that lots of the monitoring of SDGs is going to happen in multi-stakeholder platforms. And these multi-stakeholder platforms, of course, also contain, someone has to unmute. these multi-stakeholder platforms also contain, of course, the various sectors of society, including civil society groups. So I think that's, for me, is an important area where you actually are going to check what is being achieved. For the others, I don't know. I would rather ask Tiina maybe to comment on that.
Okay, now yes, particularly at this moment, in my research agenda, the idea of global citizenship, which is very important for kind of educating everyone to understand that we are, you know, belonging and participating. Let's say the global, I mean, global experience, kind of global explicit experience is very vague. But of course, we can, as a research, we can kind of analyze the connections between this global and global. But the kind of idea of global citizenship, it's not related to kind of reflect on how it relates to development studies.
There's a question now in the chat from Hector Morales. So he's asking, or he has a suggestion for further research in citizen participation and what experiences exist in communal or collective protection mechanisms to secure the life of human rights defenders or environmental activists. So who could reply to that suggestion, Kees or Tiina? So do you see the question in the chat?
Yes, I see. So I see two questions. There's Abdulati is asking, I would like to ask about the role of local authorities to strengthen citizenship. Can I start with that question?
Yes, of course.
I think that indeed the local level is very important because the local level is tangible, and so involvement at the local level is definitely one of the areas that we are going to focus on. It's often what we call the community, and the community can be big and very sort of multi-scalar and global. But of course, the community, the local community is essential, and their local authorities try to control or undermine, but in other moments also to facilitate participation. So definitely the different scales in which citizenship is exercised is very important. And the challenge, I think, is to link these various scales together, because it is all taking place at different scales at the same time, often sort of linked through all kinds of networks. So I think this is a very important point. The other question is about from Hector, and he asks what experiences exist in communal or collective protection mechanisms to secure the life of human rights defenders or environmental activists. That's a very big question, Hector. Of course, there is, I cannot really speak about environmental activism because I'm not sort of familiar with that. But on this human rights defenders and human rights activists, I would like to say the following. For me, it is especially these human rights groups that are extremely vulnerable in a period of in which civic space is attacked, but also in a period in which international donor funding is going down, and especially the more political funding is going down. We see in a number of places that human rights groups are really sort of cornered and are in a very difficult position. And I can imagine that the working group is going to have particular attention for those vulnerable groups that do essential work, because what they often do work in a very complex, unfavorable political setting, which is essential. And the activists themselves, and that's how I understand your question, how to collectively protect these human rights activists or defenders, and how to make sure that we also can support them from the outside, which is a very important point, because we know lots of these people are under personal threat. Experiences are there. There's research done on this in several countries in Latin America. I know research done in Guatemala and Nicaragua and Colombia. So there is a bit of work going on, but it is an important point to raise. Okay. Tiina, you want to say something? I see I have another question, but let me read that first.
Okay. Let me answer the first one about the local authorities. I think that the Hector's one is more like succession to be included in the group's agenda, and I think we agree that this is a very important issue. But about the local authorities, I think that is also very important question, because we tend to speak of civil space and then the government space. But when we look again to the everyday organizing, actually the local authorities are there. I mean, kind of intertwined with the civic space, and they can be enabling, and they can be kind of controlling. But most of all, actually, many times when you look at everyday activities, those who are active in kind of civic space, in local groups, in movements, they are also active in local politics. So actually, there is kind of very close connection between these two, and at least based on our experiences in Uganda, for example, for the last 20 years, it has been the kind of trend for NGOs, for example, working on good governance and gender issues and so on and so forth, has been moving from kind of ignoring and contestation of local authorities towards more including them, critically and strategically engaging local authorities into the issues and discussions and dialogues, partly because of the kind of recognition that if they are not included, they are the structures are still there, and the change is not going to the change that they are looking for is not going to happen, because if local authorities are not included, they do their best to hinder the change, kind of in very practical terms. And of course, from the other point of view, there has been also more and more pressure from the government to kind of engage in collaboration with civil society in order to control what is happening. So I think it's very important to see in any local context that what is the relationship between local authorities and what we call civil society activities.
Okay, so thank you, Tiina. I will try to respond to another question from T. F. Haas. I don't know who is T, but F. Haas, who asks, I'd like to hear more from Kees about his thoughts on the civic-driven change and the process he is referring to. How can the potential energy in society be identified, and what are the activating factors for civic-driven change? Now, the first question, how can this, what we call civic energy, which is an energy which is present in every sort of part of society, how can this be identified? We are still sort of at an early stage of doing research on how to make that clear. Obviously, when people organize, it becomes visible that civic energy is activated. As much as also we did research in Guatemala, for example, to demonstrate that civic energy has been going underground, was latent for a period of time in which there was an authoritarian situation where people could not organize, where civic space was totally closed. But the civic energy was still underlying in society. And it came back because particular groups that 25 years before had existed re-emerged under the same name, but with other people, which was a proof that actually it is possible to keep civic energy, let's say, going underground for some time and coming back. Now, what it is exactly, we don't know. It's more sort of, it is basically another sort of term for agency. But agency in a way is also a limited term. If you say energy to make this sort of civic change, civic energy, has more possibilities. And that links to your other question. So what are the activating factors, or what makes civic-driven change happen? Well, the short answer is a few people, a few citizens sit together and have a common understanding of what they want to change. This is often how it happens. I mean, that's this old Margaret Mead's idea that every major change in society has started by a few people sitting together and discussing, we have to change something, we have to do something. And then gradually by mobilizing and organizing, things get bigger. So, but of course, limiting factors are the context. We talked about it earlier, the context of to what extent these citizenship rights can be exercised. But activating factors probably have to do with scale. Yeah. You probably have to start somewhere low and not too ambitious. It has to do with a common identity and common sense of belonging. That is an important element. And a third one is an idea about where you want to go. And in the civic-driven change discussion, we have called this the imagined future. How do you sort of collectively see your future, envision your future? Those have been identified as important factors. Okay, so yeah, we still have some questions, some space for additional questions. Another 5 minutes on the chat, or maybe Tiina wants to say something.
Just to comment on what you said about how to activate. Of course, it also relates to the if you look at the development issues. So the kind of interventions, we have a lot of interventions that want to activate civil society and want to activate citizenship, and that's a very important question. That can this be done by intervention, or is it something that then emerges when it emerges? And I think that's a very interesting question.
Well, the discussion here, if we sort of put it in binary terms, is that there is a very big difference between donor-driven change and civic-driven change. And of course, the question here is, who is financing that? Because donor-driven change obviously is financed by international donors or by local donors. It could be by governments. But the whole problem is that often then external agendas are being implemented. And as a result, the actions are probably not very sustainable, because if you make change because money is coming in, you can probably not give any follow-up unless there's additional money, and hence the whole problem of aid addiction, a lack of sustainability. So there is an issue to be dealt with. How can you finance civic-driven change?
Yeah.
And I think that's an important question. But still, I mean, we have seen that there's lots of examples also of local resources available. So I find this an interesting area of research.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, for example, we have many examples here in Tanzania about so-called social accountability projects that was a kind of, you know, the buzzword a few years ago, and there was a lot of social accountability committees formed in local context, and then after, okay, they trained, they did some monitoring, and after the project is over, there's no committee anymore. So kind of it's not something that emerged out of the community that they want to do this kind of accountability, but it was, as you said, kind of very agenda from outsiders and the NGOs who kind of wanted to see this kind of certain kind of citizenship, but that was not the kind of citizenship that emerged out of the experienced, citizenship demands.
I would be very interested to explore, especially these types of experiences, local level experiences, where groups are sort of experimenting also with new sources of income. I mean, we are sort of gradually entering a post-donor or at least a post-international cooperation society, whether it refers to civil society. So what are potentials and possibilities, and what are experiences that we can learn from, would be a very interesting area to explore further in our working group. Can we still take another question?
Yes.
Okay. So the question is, do you think the activity will be strong if the civil society works at the local level? Abdullah is asking. And with the activity, you probably mean the activism. Is activism strong if civil society works at the local level? How I understand the question is that activism more at the national level will have more impact than at the local level. As I said before, I don't think you should disconnect them. If you look at civic-driven change processes, that are driven by groups of citizens or by social movements or by coalitions of organizations, we always see a permanent parallel dynamics going on at the local level, at the national level, and often also linked to the transnational and global level, which is going on at the same time. What is important is how are these different levels connected? Nobody's working isolated at the local level. I don't believe that. But what I do see is that I see coalitions operating at the global level or the national level that are disconnected from the local level. And I think there you become less effective, or you are looking, you're sort of representing different types of interest, or you're pursuing goals that are not shared by others. So I think there's a very important challenge to make sure you are operating and you are linked to these various levels. That would be my answer.
Maybe connection to your question about the financing and then connection to this local level.
Yeah.
That's an observation of our research in the rural communities in Tanzania. What seems to be the ones that are sustainable are the local, economic groups, loan groups, and so on and so forth. That they introduced Park Care over 20 years ago. They are still there, and people are very active. And they okay, this is good thing, and this is where we get the economical agency. So I think this is also something that we should explore more, that how the kind of political citizens agency and the economical agency are very much intertwined. If you have the economic motivation, it also kind of strengthens your agency of taking part in local politics and local change processes as well.
Yeah, and I think what makes the importance of linking to the national level has to do very much with advocacy activity, lobbying activity. For example, the Dutch government has now engaged with this huge, I mean, they have stopped financing basically NGOs, and they've said what we have to do is to strengthen governments by making sure that civil society groups are effectively lobbying together with other actors to make sure that the governments actually are taking responsibility. That's in a nutshell a very big and sort of complex program, which is interesting, but of course also very ambitious, but very interesting to follow, because that is a way of scaling up also those local efforts at the national level. Because of course governments have to take responsibility, and there is lots of dialogue and discussion going on, and also lots of tension. So I think, yes, that is also part of our agenda. Okay. Okay, we go back to Suzanne.
Okay, so I thank you very much. Especially the participants asking these interesting questions. And so if you're interested to think with the working group also in the future, then you can join it. So Kees and Tiina will be very delighted to receive some expressions of interest. And one of the main activities of the working groups, of the EADI working groups, are contributing to general conferences via call for papers. And they also organize seminars and workshops. So
can I say one thing?
Of course.
Of course, our working group has just been established. We were working on these themes already within EADI, but we thought we wanted to sort of create a group, especially to gather some critical thinking about civil society and citizenship from different disciplines. Obviously, the conference of EADI in 2020 is going to be an important moment, but we also would like to be in touch with people that are interested already before that. So we will approach everyone who participated in the webinar and invite them also to share their ideas later on with us. And then gradually we will sort of focus our agenda even more. So thank you very much for organizing this.
Yeah, thank you. And so the recording of the webinar will be available on the EADI website. And so, yeah, please share it or use it. And I thank you very much again and say goodbye.